Hi everyone, this is Navika Chhauda, a cloud engineer, Microsoft most valuable professional, and a LinkedIn top voice in cloud computing. I warmly welcome each one of you to the 17th episode of Tech Chat with Navika, wherein today we would be discussing Azure Open AI. And to share some insights on it, we have an expert with us today, Geert Baeke. Geert is a Microsoft most valuable professional in Azure category. Having 20 plus years of extensive working experience in the IT industry, he is currently working as an Azure and AI architect at Cronos. His technical expertise lies in the area of cloud, Azure, and everything related to it. Containers, design, security, serverless frameworks, IoT, and the list goes on. He's had extensive years of experience in working in the leadership positions, and here he is today with us to share his insights on Azure OpenAI. Thank you so much for gracing the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great. So looking forward to the podcast because the topic seems to be very interesting. And I'm sure even I will take away so many things from this podcast. So then let's get started.
All
So
right.
nowadays we are actually seeing that AI is being extensively used, right? And there's this exponential growth in the usage of AI, and especially if we talk about technological world and IT industry, companies and the businesses have started integrating AI literally in their daily work and in the workplace, etc. And therefore, in today's episode, taking this forward, we would be discussing a topic pertaining to Azure in the field of AI, that is Azure OpenAI. So, to get started with it, at the first place, let's try to understand what is Azure OpenAI service all about. So, Geert, can you just throw some light on it as to what it is all about from the
Yeah,
basic
great.
level?
I'll try to at least. I think everybody today knows, of course, ChatGPT, right? I think everybody has seen it or heard about it or maybe used it even in the free version. Um, and that's, of course, something that when it was launched, I think a year ago or maybe already a year and a half ago, because time goes fast in those things. People were really amazed about what you could do with it, what you could get out. Really, this natural language response to all sorts of questions that you can ask. Sometimes it's wrong, we know that, but it's still an amazing thing. That field was already going on for a while, of course. The years before, there were also already some developments, but it really came out the year before. And of course, behind that ChatGPT service, there are these kind of large language models that are driving this experience. And when people work with ChatGPT, that's just an end user application, but behind it, there's really like an API that developers can use to basically create their own ChatGPT or applications that use these APIs. And of course, OpenAI launched this and brought it into the world. So not Microsoft with Azure OpenAI, but OpenAI, the company itself. But they have a very close relationship. They work very closely together, and so Microsoft also came with OpenAI on their platform. And for a lot of Azure customers, of course, that's an important thing. And they would like to use the OpenAI models, but they would also like to have like the security and the governance around data, and also know where their data is residing, where it is processed. They want to have the same capabilities that they have with OpenAI outside of Microsoft. They want to have that inside their Microsoft subscription. And the important thing there is it's indeed it's an API that is provided, so developers can build their own applications using that API.
Great, that's good. So, but if you were to state the difference between Azure OpenAI and OpenAI, what would that be?
Yeah, well, there is actually from a technical point of view, there's not that much of a difference, basically. So, for example, if you use like one of their large language models like GPT-4 with OpenAI directly, and you were to use Azure OpenAI with that model, you could build the same things. And what we do see is that typically when there are some new developments within the space, typically OpenAI is developing it first or creating like a new version of the model or something that's coming first in OpenAI. And then a little bit later, it's coming to Azure OpenAI. So the development is really, You can see it's coming first in OpenAI, and then it's coming later to Azure. For example, with the new preview model of GPT-4 that was made available by OpenAI on their Dev Day, I think a couple of months ago. And then soon, I think 3 weeks after, it was available in Azure OpenAI. And there's this kind of commitment that whenever there's like a new development or a new model that's released by OpenAI, you're bound to get that as well in Azure OpenAI. But of course, the big difference is that with Azure OpenAI, you can decide where you deploy your models, and that you cannot do with OpenAI itself. So I'm based in Europe. I can deploy models in France central region or in Sweden central region, for example. And I know that that's where my data is going to be processed. And I know indeed for many companies that's important that their data stays like in their region, in the European region, for example. And that's the same, of course, across the world. And that's, of course, one of the big advantages. One other, for example, is the fact that you can integrate this open AI service from Azure in your own network, so that you can have a privately reachable API server to work with these models without it being exposed to the public internet. And of course, all the Microsoft logging and metrics that we know of, like with Azure Monitor and so on, that you can really incorporate it into a Microsoft solution, like we're used to with all the Azure services. Yeah,
Right. It's like we can incorporate those five pillars what we have in Azure architecture, right? As you just mentioned, security,
yeah,
monitoring, even cost
yeah,
optimization in that sense, right? In
yeah.
that way.
That also, yeah, that's an important aspect also with OpenAI, that indeed to make sure costs are well managed,
Yeah,
because that's always an important aspect there. Yeah.
that's right. So as we're talking about costs, and you also mentioned about the models that it incorporates, like 3.5, 4, etc., etc. So can you just throw some light and explain the different types of Azure OpenAI service models that are offered, and also if you can let us know the purpose of each model, as in
Hmm.
when should that be
Yeah,
deployed and stuff, because I'm
yeah,
sure it would be like directly proportional in a way with cost. Not too
yeah.
sure, but I would love to hear that from you.
No, no, indeed, you're absolutely right about that. So I think, yeah, when it started with ChatGPT again, this year or year and a half ago, it was, I think, basically their GPT 3.5 model, and that was the model that they used. That was sort of having these interesting capabilities that we started to see at that point in time. And GPT 3.5 is actually still used today. And there's even a turbo version of it, which means it's much faster than it was before in the beginning, right? So today, when a developer is starting to build an application using such a model, the first choice they will indeed have, what will we have to use, or can we use GPT 3.5 turbo, or do we need to use the more capable model, which is GPT-4, of which there is also a turbo version now, but that's in preview. And the difference is especially the difference is there in cost. The cost of GPT-3.5 Turbo, I know, of course, I never know prices by heart, but it's really like 10 times or more cheaper than GPT-4, for instance. Maybe it's a different ratio, but it's sort of in that region. So from a cost perspective, if you build an application that has lots of users, and you can do it with GPT 3.5, it gives you the capabilities that you need. Then I would go for that. Now, what we see in practice is that for many applications where, for example, we build a chatbot, or we build like an application that needs to reason over, let's say, more complex documents, we often see that it's not really working well with GPT 3.5 Turbo, that we need the extra capabilities of what GPT-4 offers. It is a bit better in, yeah, between quotes, of course, reasoning. It seems to sometimes better understand relations between different parts in a document. And it can also solve some more complex answers a bit better than GPT 3.5 can. And that's really, we always have to evaluate that mostly through testing, really, to testing the application and seeing which one do we have to use. And of course, we prefer to use 3.5 as much as possible to keep costs down for the customer. But often that's not possible, and we have to use the more advanced model. But I must say, OpenAI and Microsoft, because the prices are the same, and whether you go to OpenAI or Microsoft, the model prices are actually the same. They did quite a good job with GPT-4 Turbo in the sense of lowering the price of GPT-4 as well. So we now see people building applications. Well, they are in preview, of course, so POCs and applications are not going to production yet. They use GPT-4 Preview, the new model or the Turbo model, and that's way less expensive than the default GPT-4 model. So I foresee that in the future, when GPT-4 Turbo is out of preview, yeah, that will be, of course, the default. Right, that will quickly become the default model if you need the extra reasoning capabilities. Yeah.
Got it. I think this is pretty much customizable then in a way, according to your explanation. And it also depends on the needs and requirements from
Yeah,
company to company, right? As to which model they want to deploy according to the requirement, right?
yeah,
Keeping in mind, yeah, keeping in mind their aims, goals, the accuracy they wish to, right? And along with the pricing as well, definitely. That
yeah,
is true.
indeed.
Um, yeah. So, so we have discussed about what is Azure OpenAI. We have also discussed the why part of it. I know you have mentioned about, small and tidbits that, what are the different type of, you know, capabilities or the features of Azure OpenAI. But I think it will be great if we take that as a separate question altogether. So if you
Mhm.
can just tell some main capabilities of Azure OpenAI, if you would like to share a couple of them so
Yeah.
that then we can move on to the workflow of it.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. So yeah, as I discussed indeed already, like the models are the same, whether it's at OpenAI or at Azure OpenAI. When you use the API, the models will respond in the same way or a similar way in both cases. What Azure OpenAI is, of course, adding, and apart from the infrastructure part, is that Microsoft is also trying to make it easier to build applications that typically follow this RAG pattern. RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation, because a model, when you ask it a question, it knows about the general data it has been trained on. But if you want to create a chatbot, let's say about your internal HR procedures, yeah, the model doesn't know anything about your HR procedures, right? It doesn't know anything about it. It hasn't been trained on that. And we don't actually train a model on your own documents. What we do is when a user asks a question, for example, are glasses supported for my children in the healthcare plan, for example, then we are actually doing a search first somewhere in a database. We are searching for documents that talk about that topic. And then we find a couple of pieces of text, hopefully, that are relevant to the question. And then we basically put that in a prompt and we ask the question again with that extra context. And that's exactly retrieval augmented generation. The model generates a response, but based on a retrieval it did first. Well, actually, the developer does a retrieval first and then feeds that to the model. And to avoid that, you have to do that all yourself as a developer. You have to do that query and create a database and so on. They have developed something which is called Azure AI with bring your own data. And that's really like a more like wizard-like experience where you just say, well, my HR documents, they are over here. Take them and create like a search index for me, and then automatically the system will index those documents, will store them in a database, and then you can just add it to OpenAI, Azure OpenAI, and start asking questions about your documents. And that experience is something which, yeah, OpenAI today, well, they sort of have this in some part of what they do, but that's an extra thing that Microsoft has released. And as luck would have it, actually this week that became generally available. It was in preview for a while. It's now generally available, so companies can use that to basically jumpstart their like chatbot, for example, creation on internal documents. You don't have to write everything from scratch. So that's one big addition that they have added on top of that. Yeah.
Got it, got it. So just for my clarity, it is like it's in a way we can say that there is an integration of Azure AI with Azure Open AI from the perspective of data, right? Like we put in over there in Azure AI and then we can integrate it with Azure Open AI and
Yeah,
take the data from there. So that is
indeed.
like one
Correct.
of
Yeah,
the benefits. All right. That's
yeah.
nice. That's
And
interesting.
And there it's mainly the big component there is, of course, that's part of the Azure AI family of products, is Azure AI Search. It used to be called Cognitive Search. Now it's Azure AI Search. And that index, that search index basically, is used as a component in that easy Azure OpenAI on your data solution, this RAG solution, to make it easier to build those types of applications. Yeah.
That's nice. It's like pretty much integration of small little components of AI, which gets us to the solution.
Yeah,
That's
indeed.
interesting. Thanks for the explanation. So moving forward, like as you just explained about the chatbot and et cetera, the use cases, it would be great if you can just help us explain a little bit workflow of Azure OpenAI, like maybe the creation of the resource, like you mentioned, we can deploy it in different regions, definitely, because it's like a
Mhm.
deploy, it must be like a deployment of a resource, like we do it on Azure,
Absolutely.
right? It's just a
Yeah.
resource over there, a new product by them, and then yeah, and then like deployments or testings, if you can just take us through the workflow for
Yeah.
better understanding.
The first important thing, I already talked a little bit about it with you, is indeed that you have to make sure it's enabled for your subscription. So today it's still the case that you cannot just take any subscription and create an Azure AI or Azure OpenAI resource. There's some, if you try to do that, they will give you a link at the bottom to a form that you have to fill out. And there you can indeed say, okay, what are you planning to do with this? It's all part of the ethical AI principles that Microsoft tries to follow, to know a little bit what are you actually going to build, and who are you, and trying to build these applications. Today they're really fast in enabling your subscription. So normally with most customers, I see that after a day or something, or even faster, it's allowed, it's whitelisted on your subscription. You can start creating the resource. And then it's indeed a creation of an Azure AI, OpenAI resource. So either through the portal or with Bicep or with the Azure CLI, just the same as any other resource. And what you'll get after deployment are basically two things: an endpoint, that's your API you have to talk to because you're building applications with it. So you'll have to talk to the API, and you will get uh, either a security key to just use a key to authenticate, or you use Azure Entra ID or Managed Identity to authenticate. Yeah? Like any other Azure service, that also, of course, is supported. And from the moment you have that API endpoint, you can basically start building your application. It's just a matter of, did you enable it on the public internet? Then you go over the public internet, or did you enable it only on your private network? And of course, you have to talk over a private network to that endpoint. And then it's the same whether you're building an application with well, more or less the same with OpenAI or with Azure OpenAI. Although there are some minor differences in the APIs themselves, so they are, well, at the high level, they look the same. So it's like a REST API you can use, and there is a client for Python and so on to start talking to the service. But
Yeah.
when you are developing in Azure OpenAI versus OpenAI, sometimes you see, but that's really at a detailed level, you see small differences in how the APIs are created, because Microsoft is responsible for creating the API you talk to in Azure, and OpenAI is doing that for themselves, and they are kept very similar at a high level, but there are sometimes tiny differences that you have to be aware of. But that's more like a detailed thing there. But that's basically it. From a deployment perspective, it's really easy. It's of course the creating of application. That's where, of course, the interesting part is, in how you talk to the API and how you use it in different types of applications.
That's nice. And like once this like the creation of resource, right? Basically that we just spoke about. And post, and I think that's pretty much similar to any other resource. I think that's
Yeah,
like simple,
yeah,
like someone who's familiar with Azure wouldn't face that much of
absolutely.
issue in doing so. Like once that is done, so there's something known as Azure AI Studio as well, and we have Playground also for testing and
Yeah.
sending the prompts and all. So can you just, would you like to explain that a bit and tell us something about
Yeah,
it?
and it can be a little bit confusing there at that level because indeed we have an Azure OpenAI resource, and that's okay. We can deploy that in like any region we want where it's available in the world. Then you have the like an Azure OpenAI portal, which is basically a portal to just the Azure OpenAI services. And that
Mm-hmm.
portal also gives you like that wizard experience to build these RAG applications, like chatbots that talk to your own data, for instance. That has always been there, right? Um, and then you have also within Azure AI, but then broader, not OpenAI, but just within Azure AI, you have different kinds of interfaces and portals as well. And what Microsoft is a bit trying to do here with the Azure AI Studio is to bring that all a bit together in one experience, because now it's a little bit all over the place, so to speak. So once the AI Studio is out of preview, because it's still in preview today, you will be able to go to that one place and then indeed say, I want to start a new project. It's going to be an OpenAI project, and you will have the ability, the same things you can do today with the Azure AI OpenAI portal, you will be able to do in Azure AI Studio. And today, for a large part, that's already the case. So I sometimes use it, but we still have to realize it's still in preview, so it's not at all exactly completely finished. Maybe that will change quickly. I don't know when it will be out of preview, but that's a bit the difference. Well, for the companies I work with, we typically don't use Azure AI Studio yet. We can do all
Okay.
our work with the API directly or with the Azure AI Studio, and there you have a playground as well where you can try your prompts and test out your different things. So we can do it without Azure AI Studio, but when that's released, it looks to be very interesting to have everything at one place. So that's going to be a nice experience.
Exactly, I'm sure about it. Thank you. It was I was literally visualizing the stuff that you were just explaining right now, and thanks for the clear explanation. As we are almost going towards the end of the podcast, as you just spoke, we know that AI, and if we talk in general, Chat GPT, I think it literally works on prompts, right? And
Hmm.
it's I think prompts, giving the correct type of prompts is very crucial,
Hmm.
so that you get the most efficient and utmost or almost accurate result. And that is where prompt engineering also comes into the picture. So,
Yeah.
do you think that there are any type of prerequisites um, before getting started with Azure OpenAI? Someone needs to have, you know, going through some learning paths or something, or one can just get started with the deployment and, just play around there then.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, because it's meant to create applications. Of course, because it's exposing APIs. It's of course best to have a developer background, right? Because that's what you're going to do. You're going to build a chatbot, or you're going to build, for example, an application that is more integrated into like some kind of business process, or maybe you're doing something like document intelligent processing of documents and so on. So it's always there are always some development aspects there. So that's an important one to have some developer experience. Although I must say that today, of course, people who are doing, for example, Power Platform, you can also use today things like Copilot Studio, which was called differently. I always forget what it's called. It was Power Virtual Agents, I think. You can also build experiences in there that use Azure OpenAI, and that's then more from, let's say, from a citizen development point of view. So, although I'm saying, you should be a developer in most cases, that's the target group. More and more, you'll see low code and no code experience as well around that. But the basic group today or the target is really developers. And when we work with our customers, of course, we do a lot of things like business envisioning and seeing where we can use AI in their business processes. But in the end, developers will have to create a solution and use the APIs to their full effect. And of course, I think today still there is a little bit of let's say within the AI field. Python, of course, is an important one. thing to know. Especially the Python package for OpenAI is I think one of the most used ones. But within the Microsoft space, you also have semantic kernel, and those developers who do .NET, for instance, they can also use it. But it's really developers. That's really the focus today. Yeah.
That's right. And I think even generally, if anyone wishes someone like from cloud background or something, even like you have Microsoft Learn, right? So we have too many modules and learning paths, sandboxes. Just go there, create an account, go through. So they're great modules. I think the other day when I was going through it. So I mean, just if someone wishes to explore, you just need a Azure subscription and start with the deployment.
Absolutely,
Um,
and the playground has some code samples as well. So if you're playing in the
yes.
playground and you want to have some code example, you just click on a button, you get some Python code, and if you know a little bit around how you have to run some Python code, you can actually start exploring quite quickly on your own as well. So that's great as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's absolutely correct. All right, we have reached towards the end of the podcast, and thank you so much, Geert. It was such an honor to host you, and this entire episode of 20-25 minutes, it's been so educative and so informative. So thank you so much for that. We literally started from the scratch, and we literally ended covering up the workflow of it. So thanks to you for that. And any signing off note that you would like to give?
No, thank you for inviting me on the podcast. It's really nice to do. And no, I would say yeah, start exploring with Azure OpenAI service. It's really fun to get your hands dirty with that. So yeah, just go ahead and try it.
True that, true that. Thank you so much once again.
Yeah, thank you.